I have been surviving for over 30 years. That's right, 30 years. Now, that's a long time, and you can only imagine how my nervous system had been functioning until I made a choice. And I want you to know that you can make that choice too, that you're not a survivor and you don't have to let it drive the story of your life. I'm Marjorie, and I'm the founder of the Emergent Women Collective and the Femunati. And I want to see women lead, live, and love from their truest self. So if you are new to the channel, welcome. And please subscribe, like, and share so this content can reach more women like yourself. So, for most of human history, survival wasn't optional, right? Our nervous system was shaped to scan for danger and to conserve energy, right? Survival is what kept us alive, right? They call it fight or flight. And it helped us, endure loss and famine and uncertainty. And it trained us to be able to respond quickly to things and to stay on alert. But survival was never meant to be permanent, right? It because I believe that we're not built to just endure. We're built to adapt, to grow and evolve. And so when adaptation stops, survival can quickly become a loop in our lives. So many of us have been living survival stories since childhood, right? And we never really recognize it. And we learn how to survive early on, usually in response to some sort of disruption that was out of our control, like maybe divorce, a loss of a parent. So that caused like some instability that really fractured our sense of safety. And it just left us unsure of who and what we could rely on. Some of us were violated by people that we trusted, right? Family members and caregivers, friends of families. And then we learned how to protect ourselves by, closing off, shutting off, again, staying alert, being silent, and just disappearing in small ways. And then some of us grew up in poverty, right? Watching our families struggle to keep the lights on, to put food on the table. And survival, it wasn't a concept, it was a way of life, it was an atmosphere that we lived in. And then some of us experienced all of the above, right? We might call it trauma. And the ways we learn to survive, right? Being vigilant, um, self-reliant, enduring, this endurance that we had, the strength, the courage, all of that. They were what our bodies needed at the time, right? So these experiences, as we had them early on in life, they didn't just stay there. We carried them forward into adulthood, and they shaped how we relate to one another, how we relate to safety and trust, money, love, around the choices that we make. And so over time, survival is not just a response to circumstances, but it becomes an identity, right? And I also want to name this too, not just from a place of, survival being personal, but it can also be real external conditions, external threats that keep our nervous system on edge. I mean, case in point, what's happening currently right now in the United States and across the world, right? Many of us are holding this quiet brace in our bodies, waiting for something to break, for all hell to break loose, or, something that we can't even name yet, right? But it's holding our nervous system hostage, right? And every day the more and more we see more of the news and the things that are unfolding, it is continuing to bombard our system. And so all of that lives on top of our own personal struggles and personal stories that we have, right? And so this makes me think about one of my survival stories, right? Now, my survival story actually started really early. It started when I was 6, right? And then there was another one compounded at 12, another one at 22, then 40, and then most recently I had one at 55, right? And they're all at different degrees, right? But each time that happened, my life was rearranged without warning, right? And I talk about that in a video that I did, I think last month, titled When Life Rearranges You, if you want to check that one out. But the most significant moment for me really came when I turned 40, right? I went from being this upper middle class stay at home mom to spending the night in jail. And upon being released the very next day, I could not go back to my home and I could not be around my 6-year-old child who I had been at home with from the time that she was born. I had no family nearby, so I was left homeless. And over the next 2 years, I was fighting for custody of my child and trying to rebuild my life. And I write all about this in my memoir titled Who the Hell Do You Think You Are? If you're interested. But that first night in jail, I was sleeping on the floor on a cot, and I met a few women there and realized that we were all living the same story, right? Different details, but same outcome. We were all there because of the men we loved, right? And after I was released and over that 2 years, something shifted slowly. One of the ways that I was able to move through my survival story was by turning my lens towards the women, other women, where we were having the same experience. And I didn't have a word for it then, but I was alchemizing my pain. And as I healed, I was building spaces for them to heal as well. I brought women together at coffee shops and other spaces. And then I started creating workshops. I did some group mentoring and created retreats. And all of this ultimately led to me starting a nonprofit that focused on the empowerment of these women through storytelling. So, what I did was I found a way to adapt, right? But till that point, I didn't really know myself. I had lived inside roles like a mother, a wife, right? I had lived inside structures like, you know, being a community member, active in the church, right? I had lived inside someone else holding my life, like being the good wife, like submitting to my husband, right? But my healing helped me see the parts of myself that I had kept small. So it helped to show me how I even got the reason why I got to that place. And the parts that learn to rely on external stability instead of my own internal trust. And I talk about this in another video about the inner union you have with yourself, right? Before you have an external union. Had I known myself, had I trusted myself, had I had that union within myself, it would have probably saved me that experience. So what was happening was I didn't just heal, I evolved. I learned how to trust myself to make decisions for my own life. And that came from intentionally slowing down, learning how to breathe again on my own, grounding myself, letting myself grow instead of just recover. Now, people were looking at this and they were calling me strong and resilient and courageous, and I was. But something else happened. I learned how to perform strength. I learned how to survive in a way that looked successful. So I entered another chapter of survival, one that was driven by validation, by being seen as doing better, by proving that I had overcome something. So I wasn't no longer just surviving chaos and crisis. I was now surviving through performance. And that's when I realized something important. I wasn't yet sovereign. And this is what I call the mirror. This was where I was. I was at that point looking at myself in the mirror deeply. And the mirror doesn't just show you what's already running the show, right? It doesn't just show you, yes, this is a survival mechanism. And it's not just showing you that from this place of judgment, right? But it's showing you this deeper layer of what's behind the mask. When I was able to slow down enough to look, I could see that my life wasn't failing. It was functioning as my survival system was designed to function. Now, this realization is what brought me to what I call the map. The map is where recognition turns into guidance, right? This is where I could finally see the survivor archetype clearly, not as this personality trait, not as some sort of generational curse, not as, um, I'm waiting on God's timing or I'm just not good enough, but as a learned operating system. My survival anthem at that time, honestly, was that Destiny's Child song, I'm a survivor. I'm not going to give up. Keep on surviving, right? It sounds good in theory, right? I meant it and I was proud of it too. But there's something I can tell you about the survivor archetype. When that archetype shows up in spaces with other survival archetypes, it becomes very competitive. Who survived the worst? Who's still surviving? It can be very, very toxic. So that's going to the dark side of that archetype. But the survivor archetype can also come across as being careful, responsible, protective, right? It makes you question your instincts, right? Remember what happened the last time you did that? Mm-mm-mm. It warns you about risk. This is not probably the best time for you to be doing something like this. It keeps you close to what's familiar and comfortable. And, for a long time, it worked, right? But the map shows the cost. So this is where you have to go deeper. If you continue to let the survival archetype run the show, right? We can know some things, but still not understand some things, right? Because what it does is it weakens your trust in yourself and it keeps you managing instead of choosing. And most importantly, it dulls your joy. It dampens your desires and your aliveness and your passion. You look capable, you look reliable, you might look strong, right? Because all of it, of course, is a performance. But slowly you become invisible. So now, as you move through this, right? I remember getting to this point at the map. I'm at this threshold in my life, right? I've moved through that. And this is over years, right? And back in 2024, I'm tired of this. I'm exhausted, right? I'd gotten laid off. No matter what I tried to do, it just wasn't working, right? I know what I'm supposed to do, but I can't do it. I need to move safely across this threshold. I want to take a risk and I want to bet on myself. That's where stabilization comes in. Because remember what I was telling you, 30 years of this, my nervous system is a wreck. So when you are living that survival story for so many years, your nervous system can only take so much at a time. And a lot of us don't realize that. It's not just mindset work. It's not just the somatic practice. It's not just the EFT and the tapping. It's not, there's no affirmations that will take you through this. It goes deeper and it's in baby steps. And this is what I call moving from this integration to embodiment. Because when we've done all of this healing work, right, we feel like magically, I've done this work. So obviously, right? But yet still, what's still running in the background? That's that same survival operating system. So there's three things that I did daily that were baby steps for me that I had to do. One was I had to orient myself. Every day tell myself, I am here. This is now. I don't look to the past. I don't look too far in the future. Be present here now. I anchor myself. I feel into my body. Trust my body. Listen to it. Trust the signals. This moment, right here, right now, grounding myself, being present with it. Then I stabilize and understand that nothing about the moment that I'm in requires anything of urgency, right? I'm not in a crisis moment. This is how we teach our nervous system that it's safe to evolve one day at a time through choice safety, identity safety, and emotional safety. Now, there is a threshold tension, right? So this has to be a daily practice. And you take it month by month. So that's what I did. Each month, I would reevaluate where I was. I would test that tension, right? By taking risks, by listening to myself, right? By moving from my internal knowing, right? And while I moved through this, I was discovering and working with these feminine archetypes that I'm going to be taking you all through over the next few weeks. So, this brings me to the archetype that I identified with that often carries the survival pattern in the most subtle ways, right? And all of them do, right? The bride archetype, the dangerous woman archetype, but the Renaissance woman, right? This one is where it shows up the most. And I know this because this archetype is most pronounced in me. She lives at this intersection of many gifts. She is capable in more than one lane, right? She doesn't stay in one lane. She's in many different lanes, right? Which can, you know, push her into, hyper performance. She learns how to do a lot, but the world doesn't always know how to value it. She can be an under earner. She can be misunderstood. She's actually told most times to simplify herself, right? And then over time, that misunderstanding, it turns inward, and it starts to feel like you're either not enough or you're too much. And the truth is, you've always been more than enough. You just haven't been living in a system built to hold your range. And here's what you need to know about the Renaissance woman of today: you can't keep her in a box, you can't hold her down by one way of being, right? She is a woman that can move across roles and passions. She can be strategic and creative, spiritual and visionary. Being a Renaissance woman, that archetype isn't about doing everything because you can. It's about living fully, refusing to shrink and play small, and honoring all of who you are. I believe that the Renaissance woman archetype will be at the forefront of reimagining leadership for this next era as we begin to let go of that survival struggle story that's leading our lives. So now, when we cross that bridge, right, we recognize, we identify, and now we alchemize. The bridge moves us from what we know into what we can live, moving us forward into a life where we don't function from survival anymore. That tendency will always be there, but it's not what we're leading with, right? Once you learn to observe and recognize it, you can see it for what it is and move past it. So the question isn't whether you can survive, it's who do you become when survival is no longer running the show. And that is something we can discover together. So over the next few weeks, I'm going to be talking about these various different archetypes, some mythical, some historical, some living, some that I've created, because I believe that the archetypal stories and lessons, they can be mirrors into who we once were. They can be maps towards the women that we're becoming, and they can be medicine for the parts of ourselves that we haven't met yet. This work isn't about fixing yourself. Like I said in my last video, you don't need to be fixed. Women don't need to be fixed. It's about recognizing the parts of you that learned how to endure and allow it to evolve beyond the survival. It is time for us to evolve. So, if you want to explore this more deeply and you're ready to go beyond the healing work into your personal evolutionary work, I've created a guide or an assessment process called the Emergence Map. And it helps you to see when this pattern, this story first took hold in your life and where it kept recurring, what has been protecting it, how it lives in your body, and who you're ready to emerge into. The woman that is emerging out of this. So you can reach out to me directly about how you can take this assessment, and you can comment below in the video. So until next time, I am Marjorie, and this is the work of remembering who you are before the world told you who to be.